I want to give you the very latest here during the overnight on what is going on with the tropics. Two different storms, Aaron and Dorian, we'll be talking about. This is Dorian. Here's Puerto Rico. Again, luckily 2 years ago they got hammered. Still taking them time to recover. This time the storm missed them to the east. So that was good news for them. The storm system, if it had hit there, would have been devastating, but it also would have weakened the system. So we are glad that it missed them, but if we'd like to get something else to try to tear this storm apart now, since the mountains didn't do it. Down here, the British and American or U.S. Virgin Islands came right about over top of them. We still have this storm by tomorrow. It'll be subtropical or not even a storm at all, just an area of low pressure. Right now, it is still the remnants of Aaron, still being called Tropical Depression Aaron. By tomorrow, we won't even get advisories on it by late in the day. But again, this is the one we're concerned with the most. Still not totally symmetrical, so it's not completely organized at this point. Still Category 1, winds gusting to 105, sustained winds at 85. Going to strengthen as it gets over the warm waters of the Bahamas, gets in a low wind shear environment over the next couple of days, and then very likely be a Category 3. Yesterday, I was talking about, or about 24 hours ago, I was talking about some possible explosive development. Unfortunately, that looks like a very good chance of that happening. So approaching the Florida coast here as a Category 3 storm is the current forecast. You look at this cone of uncertainty, though. Heard Tim talking about it earlier in the day on Wednesday. 67% of the time, 2/3 of the time, this center will be within the cone of uncertainty. That's a pretty significant factor, that 1/3 of the time the storm will be outside of that. So it would not be unheard of, and in fact would be relatively commonplace for this storm instead to be down near Key West or up here north of Jacksonville. That's how many days out we are from this storm still affecting them and how wide an area it could encompass in terms of the potential track. So just remember that. Don't think it's just going to necessarily hit Central Florida, even though things are staying fairly consistent. It could be anywhere from South Florida up to North Florida. Dorian is set to rapidly intensify in the next few days. Why? Well, warm water ahead in the mid-80s. A low wind shear environment is going to allow it to stay vertical. Think of a thunderstorm. When a thunderstorm is straight up and down, the air can come in, go up, and go out the top, and it doesn't get disrupted. If the storm is tilted, the inflow comes in at the bottom, and then it's not going up the shaft of the thunderstorm, so it ends up, again, not really organizing. So that low wind shear environment is going to allow it to stay on top of each other and to have those storms be rather large that make up the center of it. No more land also to mess it up. No more mountains like Hispaniola. Now we'll talk about the two main computer models, really. This is the American model in yellow and the European model, which statistically over the last 10 years or so has been the best performing model, long range. And the tighter these are packed together, the more intense the storm is. Look at the intensity of this hurricane according to the European model, or ECMWF, as we get into, what is this, Friday evening. And then the American model, very similar, almost in the exact same position, just not as strong, probably more like a Category 1 storm versus that Category 2/3 storm that was being shown on the European. And here, this is a Category 4 storm, according to the European, maybe even a Category 5. The central pressure, when I looked, was down to 928 millibars, which is borderline there potentially on a Category 5 storm. A lot farther south in Florida, this system is the American, not as strong, and it has it a little bit more to the north. A lot of the other short-term computer models, like the HWRF and the HMON, have it coming in more intense, sort of in between these two systems in terms of the intensity, and fairly consistent right in sort of Central Florida there. So this is one of the farthest south of all the models. And then we really get into days 4 and 5, a big spread. In days 6 and 7, what happens to it? The American computer says it sort of sits in place over South Georgia and just dies out, while the European model has it coming here into the Gulf of Mexico and potentially causing more problems. So all of these different computer models, again, spread all up and down the east coast of Florida. Some of them taking it, starting to turn north. But in general, we get this northwest movement and then almost due west movement So what's going to steer it? What causes these storms? Well, it's the strength of the high pressure in this case to the north. This high, if it's a little weaker or 40 or 50 miles farther out toward the Atlantic, it's going to allow that flow to pick it up and bring it again up the coast, which is highly unlikely, but even a somewhat medium strength ridge would steer it here into north or central Florida, where a stronger ridge is going, think of it like a ridge of mountains. It's an area of mountains that this storm can't pass, and that'll take it more here into central or southern Florida. In terms of tearing a storm apart, I mentioned it being vertically stacked. Well, the wind shear does that, and the wind shear, even somewhat moderate wind shear, would show up as green. We really don't have that. Green is still fairly light, and you can see there's just not a whole lot of wind shear with this system forecast over the next several days. So that's why we're saying rapid intensification is possible. So there's the storm continuing to work toward Florida. We'll have a lot more, of course, update this consistently as the storm gets even closer to land. For now, that's the latest.